So we had to play around a number of people in order to get this to work under the Angular compiler options. Needed, let's just get my chat back up. Needed to set strict property initialization to false. So many people needed this. Probably use ng-serve to get this back running. You really only need to use ---- open when you first launch it, because then it'll just open the browser tab. I've already got it open, so I don't need to use the ---- open option. So what I want to do in this part of class, we've mocked up one project. But I actually want to mock up 3 and then use a loop to display them, and then even build a little form that we can click on a project and it'll populate our form. Okay, so now we're back running here. So I'm going to go back to my component. I'm going to make a few changes. So I'm going to comment out this project for now. So instead, we're actually going to mock up some data here. So we've defined our model. We're going to create a mock list of projects. So I'll define it as a constant. And typically in Angular and in many other languages, we name constant in all caps. So this is going to be an array of type project. So we're going to create 3 projects, give each one a unique ID name. The course might be the same. We'll say ID is maybe 101. The name equals lab 2. And the course is COMP2106. Sorry, this shouldn't be equals, this should be colon. So I'm going to repeat this twice. I'll just change the IDs. We'll have ID 102, 101, 102, 103. Quiz 3. And tutorial. I can put this in the chat. So here's our mock data. So with our first example, we created one project and we displayed the project name and project course in our HTML. With this data set, instead, we want to pass this whole project's object, and then we want to use a loop to render the project names into our HTML. So we will make mock data available to HTML view. So let's see. Var projects equals projects. Oh, maybe I don't want var. Sorry. It's just a property. So we're going to make this available in the view, and then we can use an Angular loop structure in our HTML. Okay, so I've commented out the single project we had before. We've now made an in-memory, a little array of 3 projects. And we're passing this as projects to the view. So now I want to go to my Angular component, HTML, right? No longer recognizes a single project. I'm going to get rid of this. And we're going to use a loop. So first I'll use a card container. And then I'll use a div, and Angular has kind of an interesting looping structure. I'm going to use this tag, this ng4. This is like an Angular for each loop. And it's got the star. So if I do star ng4, I'm going to use let project of projects. So this will loop through our project list, calling each record, each item in the array a project. And I'll give it a class as well of card. And now we can use our handlebars tags to display project. If I hit dot, we've now got our 3 properties that are defined in the component. So we want to output our project name. So if we look at this in our browser, we now get these little cards, little animation effect, and it shows our 3 project names. Let's see what happens in real time. Again, if we change the data source, well, I guess we'd be changing the component. It's going to reload. So if I wanted to make a 4th project, name, assignment 2, course. As soon as I hit Control S here, my page should reload, and we should get a 4th card. As soon as I hit save, my browser now has 4 projects. Doesn't matter. This is optional. You don't have to add another project. Just wanted to show you how it works. So the ng4 lets us sort of inject server-side logic directly into an HTML tag. So it will create a div for every element in our project's array. We're going to add one other section onto this HTML document. We want to add a little form below, so when we click on a project, it will populate the form with the ID, project name, and course. And if we actually update the data by changing data in the form, it will actually update our cards up here as well. So we'll see that two-way data binding and how it works. So I'm going to create a simple form. We'll create it first just as a regular HTML form. Then we'll have to do a little bit of configuration for our component to be able to use the forms. So for now, we'll just add some HTML here. I'll maybe center it as well. So again, we'll use card container. Maybe instead of a div, I guess I could do this as a section. Doesn't really matter. So in here, we'll put in a heading that says project details. And we'll add 3 field sets, label and input box pairs. Create a field set. Actually, we won't do any classes yet. So I'll have a label for ID and an input. I'll just see how this looks so far. Just save that. All right, so you get a form here in the middle. I guess we want this heading to be above. Maybe card container isn't the class I want. I'll just take that out for now. My class. And I want 2 more field sets with labels and inputs. So I'll just copy that. 1, 2. This one will be name. And this one will be course. So here's how it looks so far. Nothing earth-shattering, just vanilla HTML. Section, heading, bunch of field sets. We don't even need a form tag, you may notice. So it now kind of looks like this. We'll clean up the CSS in a little while. It's okay for now. I could add a little bit of CSS here even. So maybe we'll give these a class. Class of LBL. So we can set the widths on our labels. We could go to our style sheet and we'll just define, a width and a display as inline block. So that way our labels will line up nicely. We do that. So I'll give it a class. Let's go down to the bottom of our style sheet. We'll define a label class. Maybe 75 pixels. Oops. And we'll display as inline block. So this should align our labels, I think. Yep. And maybe on my field set, I'll get rid of the border as well. Let's set border to none. I don't like that border. That looks better. So now we want to bind, we want to set up that our 3 inputs have this 2-way data binding connection that we talked about earlier between our inputs. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump around. We want to bind each of our 3 inputs to one of the properties in the project model, project class. So ID gets bound to the first input, name gets bound to the second input, and course gets bound to the third input. So if we want to use our form for this, we've got to do one small configuration piece in our app module.ts. So we need a new component. We want to interact with a form in Angular. So we need to import the Angular form module. So we're going to import the Angular forms module from the @Angular forms library. We're going to import it. And then in the imports array, we need to add it here. So I've added line 7 and 16, the comma, and line 17. Our form can't work with dynamic Angular data unless we include the forms module. So this doesn't come with the scaffolded application. We've got to add this reference ourselves. So add line 7, and then in the import section, we want to add the forms module. Once we do this, we can set up the two-way data binding in the form. So our form can start to change dynamically. So what we want to do, once we've imported the forms module and added it to our list of imports, we want the effect that when a user clicks on a project, the project is automatically populated here. So we want to tie this. We need some way of selecting a project and then binding the properties in here. So we're going to go back to our component, project component. And we're going to add a selected project property that's of type project. So this is used to show a project in the form. So now we're going to add a method here. What should happen when the user clicks on a project? We'll create a method called onSelect. And this method accepts a project. Which project did the user click on? Which of those cards? It returns void. Method doesn't return anything, but it will set the selected project equal to whichever project the user clicked on. So we're going to select the project the user clicked on. Okay, so we're adding this property and this method into the component. And then when a user clicks one of our cards, it's going to call the onSelect method and set up our selected project. So we're going to add a click handler to these cards. When you click one of these, it's going to call this method we just wrote. So add that in, the selected project property, that's a single project, and we're creating this onSelect method. Once we have that, we're going to go back to our HTML so we can add a click handler, and we're going to use Angular for this, so it's not like a regular JavaScript click handler. So on our cards, we're going to use angular this way. In round brackets, this lets us call methods with angular. So when the user clicks any one of the project cards, we want to call the onSelect method and pass in this project. So if they click the Lab 2 card, we want to call our select method in the component. So now the user interaction starts to trigger things happening. It's triggering events in our component. Now, if I run this right now, we won't see any change. Nothing's happening yet. But if I click, we don't see anything. So this is sort of where the magic happens. We're now going to set up the data binding on our 3 inputs. So when a project is selected, the form inputs get populated. So we're going to start down here on our first one, our input, by open a square bracket and then a round bracket, which is kind of weird syntax. We're setting up the data binding. We're going to set the ng model. So our ng model is going to be the selected project dot ID. We're going to set the ng model on the other 2 inputs as well. The selected project.name, and down here, selected project course. So once we add that data binding, now our app starts to do some cool things. So when I click a project, my form populates. Not only that, but remember the data binding is 2-way. So what does this mean? If I change something here, soon as I make a change in the name, notice the card starts to change up here in real time. So this ng model, it's making sure that these are in sync all the time. If I wipe it out, whatever I modify here affects and automatically updates. So there's our 2-way data binding. When you change the selected project, the form values change. And when you change something in the form, the underlying data set also changes. Notice nothing's being refreshed. The data is updated in real time. I'm going to just do 2 more little additions to this and we're going to stop. The first one, okay, why are our cards not loading? Should fix that. Yes, okay. Interesting. I didn't expect that. Shouldn't have to call it on ng init, but maybe I will. Maybe just to make sure. On ng init, we'll say projects equals. I know we're initializing. Oh, This, yes, this dot projects. Let's see if that fixes it. Huh. That's weird because we still have 4 cards here. Oh, yes, it is, Ivan. Okay, right. Sorry, we'll take that out. We'll fix that. Yes, it's because it loads them, but then the two-way data bind says the form's empty. So what we want to do is we want to hide the form initially. And we can use some angular logic that when the form loads, we only see the cards. We're not going to see the form until we click on a card. So Angular has a cool way to show or hide things. What we're going to do is in this section, we can use star ngIf. If we have a selected project, meaning if this is not null, the form will be visible. If there is no selected project, the form is hidden. So now we get our cards back with our project names, and as soon as we click, right, they come back. So the last thing I want to do is add a little reset button. So if we reset the form, if we change these values, I want the form to disappear. So we'll add a reset button at the bottom. So in my section, we'll just add a button with an Angular click event. So when the user clicks it, we're going to set the selected project to null. Maybe I'll give it a little class which we can style. And our button can say hide, reset. I think once we style this, we'll be done for the day. I'll add the CSS in a minute. So I can click. Again, when we reload, our form is gone. And if I click hide or reset, it goes away. And I could just add a little class definition for my BTN class in the style sheet. I'll use the blue color from up above, which is already in the style sheet. Text color can be white. Maybe a little padding. So there's our blue button with white text. So here we go. I reset, it's gone. So you can start to see how the two-way data binding is working and how Angular allows our page content to get updated in real time. So change the underlying data, it changes in real time. Pick a different item. So we're not really working with Node and Express, but we're going to use this stuff as our client end, our front end. So I want to rebuild over the next couple classes. We're going to make a new application. We're going to use Node and Express as the server, the back end, with the models and controllers, and we're going to use our Angular HTML components on the front end. So we've kind of have all the pieces. The one piece we don't have that we're going to inject, coming back to Maggie's question from earlier, is we're going to use this Angular service in the middle. So the Angular service will connect our Angular component on the client end to the Node Express controllers on the back end. So that Angular service will sit in between, and it will call all the methods, the create, read, or update, delete methods, pass those from the Angular component to the server on the back end. So we're going to have lots of layers, and we won't go too fast. So we'll do this over 2 classes. So for next week, here is your checklist. Please review your partners. I will set up the partners very shortly, and I'll put up an announcement saying, okay, here's your partner. Here's who to submit to. Okay. Please make sure you send your feedback and submit it on Blackboard by tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock before the weekend, so your partner can take that feedback in as soon as possible in working on assignment 2, part 2. Burak, I will put out an announcement with all the partners. I have to create them. So you didn't miss anything. So just watch for an announcement from me a little later this afternoon with that. And it'll be posted on Blackboard as well. Okay. If you'll want to use the video, which I'll upload a bit later, make sure you've got your first Angular app working. And then there is a quiz for the last 3 lessons. This is our final quiz. I think there's only 6 questions, and it's covering content for lessons 7, 8, and 9. I think there's only 1 question about Angular today, and it's due next Wednesday. Okay. So your lab's due tomorrow, your partner review, your quiz due next Wednesday, and we will start on our full mean stack single page project tracker. We'll start it next week. It'll take us 2 weeks, I think. The quiz should be available, I think, at 3 p.m. So it'll be in the lesson 10 folder at 3 p.m. Okay, I'm going to push everything up to GitHub. I'll upload my recordings. They typically take an hour or 2. And I look forward to seeing your project feedback and your project ideas as well. Okay, folks, that's all for today. Have an awesome week.